Kia ora and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Lounge. This is a space for you as a healthcare leader to just take a moment's pause and get a fresh perspective on the work that you do. I'm Katie and I work with healthcare leaders to help them juggle the demands and the complexity of those roles and help you feel excited and hopeful about the incredible work that you do. Before we get started this week, a quick shout out and an apology and an admission of a mistake. Last week when I was giving those shout outs and celebrating getting to episode 10, getting to episode 9 and all the people that had helped me, I got a name wrong, a bit embarrassing. So going to start off this week by a shout out to Lexi, whose fresh perspective and honest feedback have been really appreciated and have brought a spark and a smile to my face. And I really appreciate that. So thank you, Alexi. And I'm really sorry about getting your name wrong. No idea. I am just human. So there we go. Now, this week, we're going to talk about trust. And it's one of those absolutely massive topics. So there is no way we're covering it all in this podcast. But I wanted to hone into a couple of aspects. And this was a couple of things that struck me and that people have been talking to me about. This idea of how we connect with our teams. Yes, that's where we know we build trust. But how can you do that when you're now spread across the country? How can you do that when we're now working in such a different way? So the changes with Te Whatu Ora means that there are now national, regional teams set up and your team will be spread all over the place. And it's also got me thinking that actually when you step into, particularly, and this is just because it's my history and my story, but when you step up into a charge nurse role, or a nurse unit manager role, that kind of level, when you're looking after a team of people that cover a 24/7 work pattern, there are people that you might never see. You know, they might only work night shifts or they might only work at the weekend. So, you know, how do you build up trust with people that you never see? So I did a bit of searching around, and I think first off, we're just going to start with just some big brief ideas around trust. And I'm going to cover a lot more, and there'll be a lot more tools and resources and links in the email that's coming out this week. So you definitely want to check that out and sign up for that. You can do that at katiequinney.com/subscribe, and you'll be able to join the weekly email where there's a lot of the ideas and practical aspects, but there's also a lot of resources and tools and links in there. So there'll be a bit more about trust in that weekly email. But if we just put it into the really big bucket here, trust is the foundation of collaboration. And if you think about those ideas of either across a shift pattern or across the country, you're bringing teams together, collaboration is what you need. So you know that trust is going to be important. We also know that when staff feel trusted, you have higher levels of motivation, productivity, life satisfaction, and engagement. And people that are trusted are also more receptive, people that feel trusted and that there's this experience of trust are more receptive to organisational change. And I think in the context of everything that's going on right now, it couldn't be more important that we make sure that we're doing all we possibly can to build, to sustain that sensation and feeling of trust for people. So I found a couple of resources that I've really leaned into heavily for just the sort of the discussion that I've then gone, how would that work in healthcare? And what are examples that I can think of that resonate, or what are people telling me? And one was an article, one was a very short video, and I'll put the links to both of those in the show notes. And it's really just me kind of thinking about the topics that they have come up with and the ideas and checking in with how practical they are. I think the important thing, particularly when thinking that remote working or across the country and people are spread about in different places or not necessarily, you can't see them. One of the things that the article puts up right up front is that you can't do the tracking, the surveillance stuff. That is the inverse of trust. So, you might see these little funny videos or things about how you can have your mouse move and stuff, and how when people have logged in and stuff. The surveillance and tracking of your team is the inverse of creating trust. So that was one thing that was kind of made pretty clear. One of the people that was interviewed in the article talks about this idea of empowering autonomy decision-making for everyone from day one. And that if you are spread across or you're working remotely, then you actually need even more autonomy so you don't get stuck, because you can't just pop down the corridor or chat to somebody. So you need even more autonomy. And so your role as a leader in that space is how do you empower that autonomy? How do you make that explicit? And how do you get to the place where you've got trust by default in this team? I remember I would always say, particularly in people who were in acting roles or coming in for just a brief period of time as a secondment into a space or a team, is that assurance that, healthcare moves fast, things happen quickly, you're going to have to make a decision. And whatever decision you make, I want you to know I've got your back. I want you to know that I trust you, that you'll have made the best decision you could in that chance, in that moment. Don't feel you need to check everything with me. And I think you have to get that explicit, because in the heats of those moments, there can be a million things going on. And for that people to know that, I've got your back. So that trust by default, yes, people are going to make sometimes the wrong decisions, or there could have been better decisions. But if you're saying, I trust you, you just stop that getting stuck, which can be even worse for the situation and the people working there. So the first thing that came up in this article was this idea about setting clear expectations around communications. And this was, what I liked about this was they talked about it was a work in progress. They hadn't got it sussed, which was really cool to read, but it was about experimenting with different things. So I was thinking, we might think that everyone reads their emails. Maybe they don't, particularly if you're thinking shift pattern people, so actually just stopping and asking, what is the best way to communicate? What is the way you like to receive information? Is it a handwritten note? Is it an email? Is it a text message? I think getting that clear and having that conversation seems to be the starting point. But then those clear expectations around what that is, so you kind of pull the knowledge together and go, okay, this is how we're all going to be communicating with each other. The second idea that they came up with was around setting clear goals that foster accountability. And what I liked in this setting was this idea around collaborative goal setting. So this idea that you do that both as an individual and the boss, if you like, and as a team. What are going to be our goals? And they said that when managers and employees set goals together, then you've got a higher rate of engagement with that work. So what are ways that, if you're thinking across a shift pattern, people that you don't ever see, how do you bring them into those conversations about what goals are you going to have, or what projects you're working on as a team, and how are you all going to be playing a part in that? And I think when you're talking about teams that are across the spread across the country, it's okay, at what point in our meetings are we agreeing on what our goals are, or are you just saying this is what we're working on? How do you have those more collaborative conversations that actually are setting the goals? The next point they said was to make sure that you set time for regular check-ins. There was quite a lot in that space that I think is a whole other topic, or an additional topic. But I think one of the biggest challenges in that across shift pattern space, often you've got a large workforce for a start, so having regular check-ins is a real challenge, full stop, again, on the list for another conversation. But is there someone you can delegate those to for weekend workers or people that you don't see? Is there a way that you can divide up that work so it actually is feasible and achievable, and that everyone gets a piece of somebody that they know is looking after them to help build that trust so that they feel part of the team? And I think from a when I was reading this article, this part of the article, I was like, oh yeah, there's all these various different methods of communication. And I think that, the more add-ons of communication, the more annoying it can feel sometimes. And one of the wisest piece of information in a conversation with Melissa Crawford, who's focusing on tech with heart and the future of work, and really how do we put the human element into the future of work as well as the technology element, is that whatever systems you've got, so say it's Teams and Outlook and Microsoft, whatever system it is you've got, get to know it well. Use it as best you can for your team. So there's a real onus on that for self-responsibility to go, okay, I don't know how to use this, let's use this, let's learn how to use this. But then how can we use it as a team? And again, back to that collaborative conversations around what's going to work for us. And going back to that idea of experimenting. Let's see if this works, let's try that. So there are some tools and systems that are in place. How can you make the most of them? The next point the article came up with was around leading with transparency, and just making the point that in a spread out sort of situation, information can easily get splintered. And if people haven't got the full story, they will make up a story. So it's very easy to say lead with transparency, but you've got to make sure that you are actually bringing the team into some what could be harder conversations, whether that be about finances or decisions that are going to be made. If you're bringing them into that conversation, they're not going to make up a story. They're not going to splinter the information. And that's going to build the trust because everyone's knowing what's going on. You're not making up things and having to rumour monger. Rumour monger? Is that an actual word? So there's things like communicating openly, asking for feedback, leading by example, being vulnerable. There's some core leadership attributes in that space. And what it also made me think of was this idea of working out loud. I've seen this work really well with someone that was leading a team I was in, and they sent an email at the beginning of the week to say where they were physically, what specific projects they were working on specifically, and when was the best time to get hold of them. Is there anything going on? There was a high level of trust and autonomy within our team to get the work done, but it was also them saying, this is where I'm going to be, this is what I'm doing, so that we knew where they were. If you Google working out loud, there's a whole load of deeper stuff, but that was the way that they'd made it practical and sustainable. So you can easily add that to kind of like a weekly email that you send out or an update to people. So there's a lot in that leadership space. The next thing that came up in this article was about monitoring engagement, not productivity. So again, I the how much work have you done? Have you managed to get through that? I think it's less, I don't know, I get the impression it's kind of less in healthcare, this idea of productivity, because it is a 24/7 space and people are pretty much working really hard all the time. I think there's a level of understanding around that. But I do think there are pockets where we could just shift the frame to thinking about how do we get an understanding of engagement on a more closer basic. So from a corporate setting, perhaps you could go, if I can't see my people, how do I know they're working and being productive? Now you could take that to the weekend space, and you could take that to your afternoon shifts, or you could take that to your night shifts, or the people that are working around the country. What this article points to, and some various other resources within this article, is that long-term success, engagement is a better predictor of their productivity. Because if you are intrinsically motivated, you are going to then bring your best self to work, and that translates into performance and productivity. So engagement is a better way to say, okay, how engaged are you feeling? So again, this is a great opportunity to have a conversation about what is engagement, how engaged do you feel, and what is a way that you could do a measure or a check-in in regards to engagement for your team on a weekly or monthly basis. I'm thinking those smiley faces or, tick, but I don't know. This is a good creative conversation. But what are ways that you could measure or check engagement? Because that's going to give you a better idea around their productivity, and it's going to make them feel from a trust perspective that you are caring about how they're feeling about their work, rather than am I working hard enough, and that idea of being monitored. The next one that I really liked was this idea of culture. That a strong culture knits a distributed employees together was the phrase they use. And so how do you create behaviours and principles and values that people feel trusted, included, connected and motivated? And how do you get your team engaged in that? Now, I couldn't help but think, as I was reading this part of the article, I was thinking this is what I've been doing with some emotional culture deck sessions. Now, again, I'll put a link for emotional culture deck in there, but it is a deck of cards, a simple game that enables conversations around what do you need to feel to be successful at work. What do you need to feel from a team perspective, from an individual perspective, and then you explore what are the behaviours and actions that create that. So I've seen it in the conversations that I have witnessed and facilitated, that when people explain what it is that they need to feel successful, and by definition you need to feel trusted to be successful, then you can get to those behaviours and actions. You can actually have this team understanding and agreement about what are the behaviours and actions that support it and what detract from it. So I just couldn't help but include that one, because the emotional culture deck and having someone come in and facilitate sessions like that could really help explain and define what the team, from an individual and a team perspective, needs in that space. So yeah, it was just a perfect match for that, really. So they were the core things that came from the article that I read that I wanted to share around that building trust remotely, and elements that could be matched across shift patterns, as well as when you've got a team that is spread across a country. And I said there was another resource, and it was a video, really short video, Simon Sinek interview, and he uses this great quote around music is what happens between the notes. And he says, so trust is what happens between the meetings. And so when we are not working in the same setting and we're spread out, how do you build that trust? And it's possible, but it takes a little bit more time, a little bit more effort and intention. And he has some really practical examples of how you do that. So he describes in his company, they have regular huddle meetings. Now, I think these are fairly common across healthcare. But he was really explicit in this, that this was nothing to do with work. This was no KPIs. This was no what are the issues, what's going on with staffing. There was none of that. This was, how was your weekend? What's going on for you? How you're feeling? And they always had a sort of a funny question where they got to learn more about them. One of the emotional culture deck sessions I have recently facilitated, that was one of the actions that actually came out from the team, and I had a follow-up meeting with them not long ago, and they were saying, you know what we now do at the beginning of every meeting, we have this check-in question, and a different one of them leads it, and then they all learn some stuff, and it's bringing some smiles, some joy, and they are all learning more about each other. The trick of this in regards to trust is that you're starting to see each other as human beings. You're not roles or titles or anything like that. You're human beings, and that's the formation of trust. This is what's covered in the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I have no idea if I've said his surname right. That's an interesting point. I'm making up authors' names now. Again, I'll pop a link to the book in the show notes. Trust is the bottom of his pyramid in terms of lack of trust is one of the first dysfunction of a team. So it's a crucial thing. And his kind of action for how do you build trust is you start to share stories about who you are and what you do and what you love, and not your job stuff, the who you are as a person. So this idea of a huddle meeting specifically to check in with you as human beings, and it's not a work meeting at all. It's not even it's not even the add-on in the Simon Sinek video. He says it's a meeting just for that. The other things he said, which did make me, one other really practical thing was pick up the phone rather than sending an email. That kind of seems a bit obvious when you say it out loud, but actually how many times do you kind of just get engrossed in the emails, whereas picking up the phone, you can have a bit of a natter as well as get the job done. So again, another way to build that connection and hence the trust. And the last one that he said that was the one that made me giggle was this idea of you go online with somebody and you just work. So you're not talking, you've got a project to do, or you've got to do your emails or whatever it is, but you're online together and you can see each other on camera. You're on mute, but you can see each other. And I giggled because one of my projects, one of my goals, things that's not yet done, was to write a book. And a couple of years ago, I joined a book writing group, was going to be doing it. The symposium took over and I couldn't do both. And so it's not done yet. But one of the things that we did as a community was we'd go online, you'd have that time set up, you'd go online, you'd set your intentions. Okay, what are you going to be doing over the next hour? We'd have a bit of a natter around how things were. What are your intentions? This is my goal. Someone would set a timer, you'd get off and do the work or the writing, and then you just check back in at the end when the timer went off and went, hey, how was that? What did you do? And you'd be, no, I didn't do that at all because this happened. And to go, hey, great, see you next week. And it actually did, hold you to account for getting some work done, but it also built connections and trust and understanding and awareness and all that stuff with the other person. So I actually thought, I wonder, I've never seen that done or heard of it done in a work setting. But when I heard him say it, I thought, well, I don't know, let's just throw it out there into the universe now and see what any of you make of it. I feel like I've raced through that. So there we go. This was a slice of this massive topic on trust. That sign up for the email because there's going to be a bit more in that coming out in the week. So katiequinney.com/subscribe, you'll get there. In fact, actually, if you just go to the website, there'll be something pop up or. There's a free download about high impacts, the qualities of high impact leaders. So, if you get that as well as sign up, you might as well, right? So sign up for the email because there's going to be a lot more about trust this week. And there's a big topic, right? And we were focusing specifically on the aspects of how you build trust across shift patterns, but also when you are spread across a country. A whole list of ideas that had a lot of leadership attributes around how you communicate, how you set goals together, how you set time for people in your team. This idea of leading with transparency and what does that look like? How you monitor engagement rather than productivity. And how you define your culture and the actions and behaviours that are going to make people feel the way they need to feel to be successful. And a big shout out recommendation, and also you can contact me for running any emotional culture deck sessions that could support that conversation. So there we go, trust. Thank you again for joining me in the Leadership Lounge, your space for a moment of pause, perspective, before you get back out there and get on with whatever the week is going to throw at you. It's been a delight to be talking with you again, and I will see you next week.